Your clinical knowledge is obviously important, but let's not forget about those values. I'm talking NHS core values and those trust values. Because when you're interviewing now more than ever, I would say, from my observation, there is a focus on understanding the values of the trust that you're applying for or the team that you're applying to join. Now, when I was interviewing 3 years ago for my current role as a band 5, the interview structure and scoring was different. It was more so, if I give you this scenario, these are the answers that the marker's expecting to hear, and if you say said buzzword or you show or you get close to said answer that they have as an example, then perfect, you get said points. Now it's, if I give you said scenario, here are said values that I expect to be pulled out of that question or to be displayed in your answer from that question, if you catch me drift. Now, if that seems a bit confusing, I'm going to give 2 scenarios in this video and explain how you would kind of go about answering it and what values it would likely pull. So the first scenario, you've got a patient, you're on a ward, a patient's fallen. You're walking by and you notice a patient's fallen. You also then notice, let's say the HCA in the bay is just, the classic hand under the shoulder, trying to pull the patient up that way. What are you doing in this situation? Now, don't get me wrong, don't get scared. They probably won't be this extreme in terms of the questioning, but it's just a scenario idea. So with this type of question, the common thing they're expecting you to display is honesty. You know the manual handling technique isn't appropriate, you're aware of what the false procedures are, and you're aware that if the patient's fallen and you saw the patient on the floor, the correct procedure would be for them to be screened by a doctor, because you would have seen it on your placements, for them to be reviewed by a doctor and then use the appropriate equipment, which in many cases the flow jack, hover jack, referring to it as, to get the patient up off the floor and transfer them to the bed. Now, what they would expect from you is to say, okay, I'd be honest with the HCA, that wasn't how they were meant to do it. I would be honest with the nurse in charge and say, hey, patient fell, I'm not sure if the HCA was aware, but that's not how you're meant to transfer the patient. Or just be like, I'm not sure if the HCA was aware, but they weren't using the correct manual handling techniques to transfer the patient. And then the nurse in charge will have the discussion and go on from that. But they want you to show that you're, obviously, when you're applying for these jobs and everything, they already know that you're a caring person and we all have to get our HCPC and all that. You have to make sure that you're protecting your patients. And it's nothing personal when you say, hey, you're doing something wrong. I've had people say to me, hey, that's not how you're meant to do it. And it's in the patient's best interest for you not to do it or to go about something the way you've gone about it. They want to show that, yes, it may not sound like teamwork initially when answering this, when you think about this question, but you can be displaying teamwork in the sense of, if I didn't know my faults, and you're identifying them, you're helping me. In that sense, they want you to show that you're valuing the patient, you're respecting the patient, you're understanding that patient safety and patient care is the center of what we're doing. You get where I'm going with it? Those kind of responses, in many cases, I would say, I'd be surprised if they don't land you good points with that kind of approach to the question. But just really thinking, if I have a trust with these values, how with each scenario am I going to display each value? Which brings me on to the next scenario. So the next scenario is a common scenario. You tend to get a scenario about prioritization. Now, I've given you guys a scenario of you've seen the ward in the morning, you've gotten through as many patients as you can. You have 2 patients that have been unseen come lunchtime. One of them is awaiting investigations, but is and then the other one, is therapy fit, waiting on a package of care. You've seen them like walking around on the ward with a frame, but they're at the point now, because they've been on the ward for so long, because waiting lists and stuff, they've been on the ward for so long, they're now actually better than a frame, and if you have the time, you could potentially progress them to a walking stick. However, you're on your way back to the ward after lunch, and you get informed that you have a medically fit patient on the ward and you have an ITU step down. How are you prioritizing? How are you going to prioritize your caseload? Now, it may not be as complex as that in terms of the types of patients, but you tend to get a chest patient, a medically fit patient, and an unseen patient in that type of scenario setting, and they want to know how you're going to work it. Now, the way I approach it is I'd say, okay, well, is it just myself on the ward as a qualified? Do I have any exercise technicians with me, any therapy technicians with me, so I can distribute workload? I would be honest about if I felt that I was unable to see everybody, so then I could ask for additional help. I would, so then you're working with the team and you're showing leadership skills, because you're saying, hey, I know what I can cope with here, within reason. Obviously, if you have nothing else going on, they're going to be like, why haven't you done this? So, and then you're delegating people. So let's say you say to your tech, okay, well, we've seen John Smith 1 walking around on the frame, and you've seen John Smith 1 before. Are you, let's say, a band 4 technician? They can progress them to the stick, which then frees me up to see that medically fit patient, the ITU step down patient. With the ITU step down patient, we know with ITU step downs, you've got to chest screen them, as well as doing what else you can with them, but the chest screen is important, and ITU step downs are high up on your prioritization list. So again, you're mixing your clinical knowledge in with the way that you're answering it. Another one is like valuing people. So a good way to say that you show that you're valuing people, again, is to be like, I would hand, like I did with the tech, by saying that they could see that person. I'm valuing their contribution to the ward. I'm valuing that I'm not a one-man job. I'm not a one-man show. Sorry. So it's beneficial to have them there. I'm showing that I know what they bring to the table. I'm aware of the fact that I don't know why I froze. No idea. So the last scenario 2. In many cases, they will ask you a question about prioritization, whether it's in a scenario or just asking you straight up, like, how would you prioritize said patients? So in this case here, you've seen as many patients as you can in the morning. At lunchtime, you have a patient who you haven't seen, but is also waiting on investigations and would benefit from being seen by yourself. You have a patient who is on the ward, they're therapy fit, ready to go, waiting on a package of care, but you've also noticed whilst they're walking on the ward with the frame, they're actually really good with the frame, and if you have the time, they'd be great to progress them to a walking stick. Then, straight after lunch, you get hit with, there's a patient who is now medically fit and needs to be signed off by therapy, and we also have a new patient on the ward. What are we gonna do? Now, when I think about this, you get many types of scenario questions like this. My general approach is, okay, I would think, okay, who do I have on the ward? Is it just myself as the qualified? Is there another qualified member of staff on the ward? Do I have a technician on the ward? Do I have like someone else who can help me, because that also helps how I approach this. So we all know that the medically fit patient would be higher up on our prioritization list, because medically fit means sorted, boom, you can get them out. So there's no point putting them on the list. It's not how things are done. The patient who is new would then come second on your list, because they're new, they need screening, you need to figure out what they need. Do they need you intimately, or can they wait? The one who's therapy fit and could do with progression, well, can leave, but also would be lovely to progress them. Okay, perfect. And then the other patient who's in waiting investigations, you've already been seeing the patient, but they're waiting investigations on other realms, not in the therapy realm or stuff. Those ones are like, I would say the one awaiting investigation but could benefit from being seen would be higher up, in my opinion, than the one who is therapy fit, package care sorted, because you've already wrapped up, tied the bow, essentially, but you're like, perfect, little bit of rehab, but whilst you're still on the ward, which is a common thing, and then caseload obviously dictates what you're able to do. So with answering this, there's ways you can go about it. You can be honest about whether you think you can manage the caseload. You could be honest about, okay, I can get, like I said, about managing it in terms of I can do this, but I might need an extra pair of hands in to come and do that. You can show leadership by saying, hey, my independent support worker, or hey, my therapy assistant support, do you mind screening the new patient whilst I'm seeing the medically fit patient who requires a qualified review to get them out? Let me know, then come back to me, let me know how this patient's doing and whether I'm needed immediately, because then you can reorganize, which also shows organization, and then it also shows that you're valuing your technicians as teamwork in your approach. So questions like that will come up in your interviews. Don't be scared about them. I would just say, when answering your interview questions now more so than ever, think about what the values are of that trust in every question you answer. Even in the questions you're like, really? How am I going to squeeze the trust values in there? Find a way. Whether you, like I said in my video last week, where one of my feedbacks were, I understand, like, I gave each answer, I said the trust values in terms of how I responded to the question, but I didn't necessarily say, hey, the trust values are blah 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 blah, blah, and I would do this to display the trust values. Sometimes you gotta be broad as day, you know? But if you need any interview prep tips or anything along those lines, just a template, I have one down in my description below. So check out my interview prep template. I use it myself. So it's a good little starter to remind you of what to do. And I'll see you guys in another video.